Welcome to the Infidelity Hub. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. The rays of the sun, filtering through the high windows of a luxurious mansion in Hampton, New York, fell on Michael Reynolds' face. There was an atmosphere of peace all around, but a strange restlessness had taken up residence within his heart. He was a successful businessman who built a large empire with his hard work and intelligence. But behind this glare of success, there was a story hidden that he could not share with anyone. Michael had been noticing a change in his wife Laura's behavior for the past few months. Laura was no longer the same. She would often talk softly on the phone, stay out late at night, and when Michael questioned her, she would always make excuses for work pressure or fatigue. Michael initially ignored it, thinking that perhaps it was merely the effect of life's complications. But as time went on, his suspicions deepened. One day, Michael realized that Laura was beginning to hide her phone. She had now changed her password and would often text alone in the room. Michael's heart sank. He remembered how much love Laura had for him in her eyes when they first met. They talked for hours, laughed, and couldn't live without each other. But now everything had changed. She decided to talk about the subject with her son, Ryan. Ryan, who was now studying in college, was extremely close to his father. Michael called Ryan and said seriously, "Ryan, I think your mom is hiding something. I don't know if it's my fault or the truth, but I can't ignore it anymore." Ryan saw the concern in his father's eyes. He took a deep breath and said, "Dad, I've been noticing this for a while too. I'll help you." For the next few weeks, Michael and Ryan began tracking Laura. They were curious to know what was being hidden. Michael hired a private detective who began to monitor Laura's every move. And then came the day that completely changed Michael's world. One evening, when Laura said she would be late for a business meeting, Michael decided to follow her. He quietly sat in his car and started walking behind her car, keeping a distance. Laura drove out of a crowded area of the city and stopped the car at a luxurious hotel. Michael's heart began to beat loudly. She wondered, "Is this what I feared?" Michael parked his car a short distance away and quietly entered the lobby of the hotel. From there, he saw Laura walking in laughing with a strange man. Their bodies were very close to each other, and the closeness between them was far more than any formal meeting. Michael's hands went cold. He snapped pictures on his phone and quietly left. That night, he couldn't sleep. Again and again, the same pictures kept coming in front of his eyes. He felt that something was broken inside of him. The next day, Michael told Ryan everything. Ryan's face also hardened. He put his hand on his father's shoulder and said, "Dad, we have to do something now." This is where the revenge game began. Michael and Ryan hatch a cold and cunning plan, a revenge that will make Laura realize her mistake and take her to a point where a return would be impossible. Amid the cold winds of New York, Michael and Ryan's plans were now slowly taking shape. Michael's heart was still wounded by the scene of the night when he caught his wife Laura red-handed with someone else. The pain of betrayal was haunting him every moment, but he was not a man to be swept up in emotions. This time, he was going to take revenge against Laura and her lover David with complete coolness and composure. For Ryan, it was not only a case of disrespect to his father, but also of his mother breaking the trust that a son and mother have. The fire of anger and humiliation was burning in Ryan's heart. He wanted his mother to realize his mistake, but there was no question of forgiving. First, Michael began investigating Laura's financial resources using his business network. She checked bank statements, investment details, and property documents to find out how much financial freedom Laura has. It was important to know this because the roots of their revenge should have been not just emotional but also financial. Ryan, who specializes in technology, began tracking Laura's phone and laptop. She received a few chats and emails that proved that Laura and David were not limited to just an affair. They were also leaking Michael's business secrets. It wasn't just betrayal, it was deception and conspiracy. Knowing this, Michael's anger increased even more. She formed a team of her legal advisors to take legal steps against Laura. But he didn't want it to happen all of a sudden. He knew that the greatest revenge comes when the front man realizes his defeat gradually. Michael first prepared the necessary legal documents to freeze Laura's bank accounts. With the help of his financial advisors, he started taking control of all the properties registered in Laura's name. Gradually, Laura didn't even realize that the ground was slipping from under her feet. At the same time, Ryan launched a confidential financial investigation against David's company. The investigation focused on cases of corruption and tax evasion. Soon, David's business caught the eye of government officials. David, who thought himself extremely smart, was now in a financial and legal crisis. Meanwhile, Laura began to feel something strange. He realized that his bank accounts were running out of money and some property deals had been canceled. She talked to David about this, but David didn't have any concrete answers. David assured him that everything would be fine, but deep inside, he was also scared. Michael and Ryan decided to take the next step. He organized a party to which big businessmen, lawyers, and media people of New York were invited. This party was a trap they were about to trap Laura and David in. During the party, Michael showed everyone a presentation that contained Laura and David's secret affair, as well as evidence of their business fraud. The whole hall was stunned to see this scene. Laura and David's faces flushed. Laura shouted angrily, "You think it will make a difference to me?" Michael replied coldly, "It will matter when you realize that you have nothing left." After that, Michael showed legal documents which stated that all of Laura's bank accounts and property had been seized. David was charged with tax evasion and fraud and was arrested by the police. Laura's face now had fear and remorse instead of pride. Ryan looked at his mother and said, "Mom, you left us. Now let's see who is actually left out." At that moment, Laura realized that she had not only lost her family, but she had also lost herself. Everything was like a nightmare for Laura, but this dream was never going to end. After that lavish party, where all her secrets had been revealed, she was completely alone and devastated. She was no longer a shadow of the woman who had once lived proudly in the luxurious mansion of the Hamptons. There was no room for sleep left in the eyes that had been awake all night. Sitting in a cheap hotel room, Laura was staring at her broken phone, which was no longer receiving any messages or calls. After David's arrest, she tried very hard to contact him, but David neither picked up the call nor answered. The end of her relationship with David was as swift and merciless as her beginning. Within a few days, his bank accounts were completely frozen. The credit cards she had once spent recklessly were no longer working. His luxury car had been confiscated, and his Hampton mansion now had an auction board hanging over it. Laura didn't give up. She was thinking that maybe Michael would forgive her if he apologized to her. She knew that Michael was now a very powerful man, and perhaps somewhere in her heart she had some compassion left for him. She left for Carter's Tower, where Michael's office was. Reaching there, he saw that the guards were casting contemptuous eyes on him. Where she had been before, she had become a mere stranger. She managed to reach the reception and said, "I want to meet Michael Reynolds." The receptionist replied without a smile. "Do you have an appointment?" Laura hesitantly said, "No, but I'm his wife." The receptionist replied with a cold smile, "Your file records that you are no longer his wife." Laura's face turned pale. She realized that Michael had not only removed her from his life, but had also legally severed every relationship with her. Suddenly a door opened, and Michael walked out with his son, Ryan. His eyes fell on Laura, but there was no expression on his face, no anger, no hatred, no pity, just a cold, blank look. Laura said with tearful eyes, "Michael, please talk to me. I know I made a mistake, but I didn't want to lose you." Michael looked at Ryan and then looked into Laura's eyes and said, "You lost me when you started playing games behind my back. All that is left now is the result of your actions." Ryan stepped forward and said, "Mom, if you hadn't betrayed us, we probably wouldn't be standing here like this today. You have not only broken my father's trust, but you have also broken my trust." Laura's tears were flowing now, but she knew that these tears could not change anything now. Michael called one of the guards and said, "Show them the way out." Laura was pushed out and taken out. She looked back, but neither Michael nor Ryan looked back. Over the next few weeks, Laura's life took an ugly turn. She worked as a receptionist at a small hotel in New Jersey. The woman who once owned billions of dollars in assets now stands with her head bowed in front of customers, listens to them, and tries to smile. Every day when a rich customer checked into a hotel, he had that fake smile on his face, but a pang in his heart. At night when she was alone in her small room, she would talk to the walls, asking herself, "Am I really so fallen?" But there was no use regretting it now. Michael and Ryan had not only changed her life, but also stripped her of her identity. Laura was now sitting at the reception desk of a cheap hotel in New Jersey, where her life was tied into a routine. The woman who once sat in the luxurious mansion of Hampton and chatted with the rich over tea, now she stood at the reception and booked rooms for others and listened to the complaints of the guests. Every day he would have a fake smile on his face, but in his heart there was a deep wound of remorse and shame. His life had now fallen into a dark pit from which there was no hope of escape. But there was still one question in Laura's mind. Had Michael and Ryan really ruined her life, or could she have gotten another chance? One day, while she was sitting at the hotel reception, she saw an expensive car stop in front of the hotel. She couldn't imagine who would get out of this car. The door opened and came out to Ryan, his own son. Laura held her breath. His heart began to beat faster. Ryan looked at her and came straight to the reception. There was no expression on his face, no hate, no love, just a cold look. Laura said nervously, "Ryan?" "Are you here?" Ryan replied coldly, "Yes, I'm here on a business trip." Laura's heart began to break. There was no warmth in his own son's voice, only rudeness. "Ryan, I know I've hurt you and your father a lot." "I'm sorry." Laura's voice trembled. Ryan took a deep breath and said, "Sorry?" "Mother, forgiveness is given to those who sincerely regret. But I understood one thing after coming here. For you it is just defeat, not regret." Laura's eyes filled with tears. "No, Ryan. I really regret what I did." Ryan looked her seriously in the eyes and said, "If you really regretted it, you would have thought before doing all this. But you didn't think. You deceived us. And now you are getting a taste of the same deception." Ryan took the room key and left without looking back. Laura stood there, as if someone had wounded her heart with a knife once again. Over the next few weeks, Laura tried to contact Michael several times. He sent emails, made calls, but there was no response from anywhere. She knew that Michael had forgotten her existence as well. Laura was now completely shattered. One night, sitting alone in her small room, she pulled out her old album, which contained beautiful moments spent with Michael and Ryan. His laughter, every moment spent with him, broke him from the inside. "I lost everything, and now I have to lose myself too," she muttered to herself. But that was perhaps his greatest punishment, his own remorse. Here, Michael and Ryan's life was better than ever. His business had touched new heights. He had erased every trace of Laura from his life. One day, Ryan asked Michael, "Dad, did we show too much harshness?" Michael took a deep breath and said, "No, son. We just did what was right." Avenging a betrayal is never easy, but if we had done nothing, she would never have regretted it. Ryan nodded, but somewhere in his heart there was still a question. Had he really won, or had he also lost a piece of his heart? Laura's life was now getting darker. The woman who had once stepped into the Hamptons' luxurious mansion was now sitting at the reception desk of a cheap hotel in New Jersey, listening to the taunts of customers. He did not have the sparkle in his eyes that once made him known among the upper echelons of society. There were now only lines of remorse on his face and an emptiness in his heart, an emptiness that was now impossible to fill. Every day when she sat down at the reception desk, she often found rich customers who reminded her of her old life. One day, a woman came into the hotel wearing exactly the same expensive clothes as Laura had ever worn. The woman had come with her husband, happy, confident, and full of life. His laughter pierced Laura's heart, as if old memories had come back to life. After that day, Laura's anxiety increased. She thought she would try to meet Michael one last time. Perhaps, if he can tell his truth, Michael will understand his pain. Laura mustered courage and went straight to Michael's office. Standing outside Carter's tower, he looked at the building that had once been a part of his life. She walked in and offered to meet the receptionist. The receptionist said coldly, "I'm sorry, but Mr. Reynolds is very busy. You can't meet them without an appointment." Laura took a deep breath and said, "Tell them Laura has come to visit them. This is important." The receptionist reluctantly picked up the phone and gave the information inside. After a while, the reply came, "Mr. Reynolds does not want to see you." Hearing this, the ground slipped under Laura's feet. She just stood there, as if someone had pulled all the strength within her. But then, suddenly, the door opened and Ryan walked out. Ryan looked at Laura and said without showing any emotion, "Why are you here?" Laura's eyes were moist, but she mustered up courage and said, "I just want one last chance, Ryan. I need to talk to my father." Ryan said in a cold voice, "You don't have to prove anything now. Whatever had to happen has happened." Laura replied, crying, "I've made mistakes, Ryan, but I admit my mistake. Let me talk once." Ryan thought for a moment, then said, "If you're really remorseful, you shouldn't need any explanation. The doors that Papa has closed for you in his life will never open." Hearing these words of Ryan, Laura broke down completely. She freaked out there, but there was one last hope left in her heart. The next day, Laura wrote a letter to Michael. "Michael, I know I've caused you and Ryan a lot of pain. I don't know if I have the right to apologize or not, but I want to tell you one thing. I lost everything, but what I lost most was your trust. I'm not going to tell you to forgive me because maybe I don't deserve that. I just want to know if you have ever forgiven me, but if you ever remember me. Laura." Michael received this letter, but he put it in the drawer without opening it. There was no expression on his face. When Ryan asked, "Dad, did you read?" So Michael simply said, "Some stories are not meant to be read. They are meant to be finished." Laura had now completely given up. She knew that life had taught her a lesson she could never forget. But that was perhaps his greatest punishment. His own memories. Every day in Laura's life was now a punishment. Away from the glitz and glamour of the Hamptons, sitting at the reception desk of that small hotel in New Jersey was no less than a prison for him. But this prison was not made of bricks and walls, but of his own regrets, mistakes, and lost relationships. The nights were the hardest. When the hotel corridors were empty and the shadows of the walls were visible in just the faint light, Laura was surrounded by ghosts from her past. Her eyes would roll back to the nights when she sat with Michael and dreamed of the future, when Ryan hugged her and made her feel like she was in the safest place in the world. Now they were all hazy memories. But even during this dark period of life, a small flame of hope was burning in Laura's heart. Maybe somewhere, Michael and Ryan will forgive him. One day there was a conference in the hotel. Many big businessmen were staying there. While working at the reception desk, Laura came across a name. Michael Reynolds. His heart began to beat faster. Was it the same Michael, or just a coincidence? She mustered up courage and stood at the reception desk, composing herself. Just then, Michael Reynolds walked out of the elevator, with all his status, confident, cold, but stern outlook. He was accompanied by Ryan. Laura froze there. Michael looked at her, his eyes not looking at her for a moment. It's like he's looking at a strange face. Ryan looked at him too, but there was a faint glimmer in his eyes, as if he recognized Laura, but he didn't mind. Laura mustered up courage and said, "Michael, Ryan, talk to me, please." Michael paused, turned, and said coldly, "Why are you here?" Words like that stuck in Laura's throat. She barely said, I just want to apologize." Michael looked at her for a moment and then said, "Your words don't mean anything to me anymore. Why didn't you show the same courage when you betrayed?" Ryan stepped forward and said, "Mom, if you want to apologize, maybe you need to learn to forgive yourself first. Because what you have lost was not just us. You have lost yourself." Laura's tears didn't stop now. She said, "Can I ever get you back?" Michael replied coldly, "No." Saying this, they both moved on, as if she had never been a part of their lives. Laura stood there, tears in her eyes and emptiness in her heart. She knew that what she had lost would never come back. Sitting in his small room that night, he looked at his old photographs. In one photo, he, Michael, and Ryan were laughing. The picture had become his most precious possession, because now it was the only thing he had left. The story was now slowly moving towards its conclusion, but that wasn't the end for Laura. It was just the beginning of a new punishment that had not been handed down by any court or any person, for his own actions. In the darkness of the night, Laura was sitting alone in the corner of her small room. The faint yellow light hanging on the walls was falling on his face, where now there were only streaks of regret. Among the papers strewn on an old table in the room was a picture of him, Michael, and Ryan laughing. There was a time when this laughter was the center of his life, but now the same laughter was pricking his chest as a sarcasm. Laura gently picked up the picture, looked at it, and whispered to herself, "I lost everything, and maybe I deserved it." But as easy as it was to admit, the harder it was to grapple with. Every day she fought with the shadows of her past. She understood now that the real punishment was not external circumstances, but the emotional emptiness that was eating her from the inside every moment. The next day, as she was sitting at the reception desk, an elderly man came in. There was depth on his face, a streak of experience, and a different sparkle in his eyes. He was not a hotel guest, but a writer who was working on a book there. He asked Laura, "What's your name?" Laura replied with a cold smile, "Laura Reynolds. But now this name has no meaning." The old man looked at her with deep eyes and said, "A name means what you give him. What you have gone through is not the end of your story. The question is, how do you want to end it?" Laura was startled by his words. It was the first time someone had spoken to him like this. After that day, a new thought was born in Laura's heart. She wrote in a diary every day in her spare time. At first, she would only write about her pain and regrets, but gradually she began to mold her past into a story. She wrote about her relationships, betrayals, and lost opportunities. She knew that accepting and correcting herself was more important than apologizing. A few months later, Laura completed her diary. She decided to publish it as a book under the name of The Lost Faith. The book hit the market and became unexpectedly popular. People began to connect with his story. It was a story that wasn't just one of deception and revenge, but a story of self-acceptance and self-improvement. Michael and Ryan also found out about the book. Ryan bought the book and read it. When he read the last page, it read, "I don't know if my story will ever reach your heart, but if it does, just know that I have fought the greatest battle with myself. I beg your pardon, but more than sorry, I want you to know. I have finally forgiven myself. Ryan closed the book and gave it to Michael without saying anything. Michael looked at the book, then said to Ryan, "Can this bring us back?" Ryan replied with a smile. "Probably not, but it shows that sometimes people can change." Laura had turned the darkest chapter of her life into her biggest lesson. Laura's book, The Lost Faith, was now slowly gaining traction. Her journey of self-acceptance that began at a small reception desk in New Jersey was now taking her to a place she had never imagined. Although the success of the book had shed light on Laura's life, there was still an unfulfilled feeling in her heart, the unfulfilledness associated with Michael and Ryan. While writing the book, she had put every moment of her past into words, but she still knew that real comfort would come only when she could present herself fully in front of them. One evening, as the sun was setting and orange light filtered through the windows of the hotel, Laura made a decision. She took a copy of her book, wrote a small note in it, and packed it to send to Michael's office. The note read, "Michael and Ryan, it's not just a book, it's my soul. After reading this, if you feel that there is some humanity left in me, then perhaps you will know how much I have lost myself and how much I have gained. Laura." A few days later, the package arrived at Michael's table in the Carter Tower office. Michael opened the package, looked at the book, and put it aside without any curiosity. But Ryan, who was sitting there, picked up the book and started flipping it over. Ryan read a few pages of the book, and there was a slight curiosity in his eyes. She said to Michael, "Dad, shouldn't you read this?" Michael thought for a moment, then picked up the book and began to read. Laura's pain, regret, and confession were reflected in every word of the book. Michael closed the book as he read it and looked out of the window. Ryan asked, "Can you forgive?" Michael replied in a low voice, "It is not easy to apologize, but maybe I don't hate him anymore." A few weeks later, Laura was working on the hotel reception. She felt the success of the book, but there was still that emptiness in her heart. Just then, two familiar faces came in through the door of the hotel, Michael and Ryan. Laura held her breath. He tried to stand up, but his legs were as if they were rooted. Michael came directly in front of him and said without any preamble, "We read your book." Words were not coming out of Laura's throat. She just looked into his eyes as if she wanted to say it all. "This book wasn't just your story, it was our story too," Ryan said with a slight smile. Laura's eyes filled with tears. "I lost you," she said in a trembling voice. "But now I know I lost myself too." Michael took a deep breath and said, "We are not here to apologize. We have come to tell you that we no longer hate you." That was the biggest relief for Laura. Not an apology, but the end of the hatred was a new beginning for him. After that meeting, Laura began writing a new book, Second Chance. This book was the second journey of her life, where there was pain, there was regret, but also self-acceptance and peace in the end. Laura's life was now at a point where she accepted the wounds of the past. While writing Second Chance, he realized that sometimes the greatest punishment is not hatred, but silence in which there is no room for forgiveness. But now she also knew that forgiveness was needed more for herself than for others. She had not seen Michael and Ryan since that day, but the coldness in their eyes was no longer a burden in Laura's heart. She understood that his indifference was proof of his wounds, and perhaps this had become her new identity. Book success and self-realization. Those who read the book Second Chance saw in it a story of hope beyond pain. This story is not just Laura's. It became the story of thousands of people who try to escape from their past but are actually running away from themselves. The success of the book gave Laura a new identity. Still working at the reception desk of the hotel when she was called to give autographs for the book, She realized that life was giving her a chance again. Last meeting. One day, when she was at a book launch event, she saw a familiar face in the crowd, Ryan. He looked at Laura and smiled. This smile was different. It was not a smile of hatred but of acceptance. Ryan came up to her and said without any formality, "I'm proud that you raised yourself, Mom." Tears welled up in Laura's eyes, but this time they were not of pain, but of relief. Ryan continued, "Dad couldn't come, but he said that if I meet you, let me tell you that he read your book, and he thought you really found yourself." That was the biggest reward for Laura. Final chapter. Years later, Laura had become a distinguished author. Now she listened to others' stories, helping them so that they too could come out of the shadows of their past. On the last page of his diary, he wrote, "I had lost everything, but by accepting my lost parts, I could find myself again. It's easy to apologize, but it's the hardest to forgive yourself. I forgave myself, and that is my biggest victory." Laura was no longer the same woman who had once lived in the Hamptons mansion, but she was no longer the woman who was burdened with remorse at the New Jersey reception desk. She had become a new and better person. Do you think Michael and Ryan were right in that they never forgave Laura, or should they have given him another chance? If you were in Ryan's place, would you try to repair the relationship with your mom again? Was Laura's remorse true, or was she simply frightened by her loneliness? According to you, what is a real apology more important, to others or to yourself? If you have betrayed someone, do you think that only remorse is enough, or should you also correct it by your actions? Do share your opinion in the comment section. If you like more such stories, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any new stories.